The sign flickered the way it always did just before midnight, the neon letters buzzing and stuttering as if they were struggling to stay awake. Dead Man's Diner. Half the bulbs were burned out, leaving the words uneven and sickly, glowing red against the endless black of the highway. Rain fell in a steady, patient rhythm, tapping against cracked asphalt and running in thin streams toward the ditch that bordered the road. There were no other buildings for miles, no streetlights, no passing cars. Just the diner, alone and lit up like a beacon for anyone desperate enough to stop. Inside, the air smelled of burnt coffee, old grease, and something faintly metallic. The floor tiles were chipped and dulled by decades of footsteps, their black and white pattern warped by stains that no amount of mopping ever fully removed. A jukebox sat silent in the corner, its plastic shell yellowed with age, its lights dead. The booths were cracked vinyl, patched with duct tape in places where the stuffing threatened to spill out. Behind the counter, a pot of coffee simmered on the burner, its surface trembling every time thunder rolled in the distance. Mara had been working the night shift at the Dead Man's Diner for almost 6 months, and she already knew every sound it made. The way the door creaked when it opened, the hum of the refrigerator that cut in and out without warning, the soft tick of cooling metal when the grill finally shut down in the early morning hours. She liked the predictability of it. Out here, predictability felt like safety. She wiped down the counter slowly, more to pass the time than to clean it. Midnight was usually quiet. Truckers came through earlier, before the rain got bad. Drunks from nearby towns never drove this far out. Most nights, the only customers after midnight were insomniacs and people who didn't want to go home yet. Tonight, there was no one. The clock above the pass-through clicked over to 12:07 a.m. That was when the door opened. The bell above it rang, a thin, sharp sound that cut through the diner like a knife. Mara looked up automatically, her mouth already forming the words she'd said 1,000 times before. "Welcome in. Coffee's fresh. Sit anywhere you like." But the words died in her throat. The man standing in the doorway was drenched. Water streamed from his hair, down his face, soaking into a dark jacket that hung off his frame like it weighed twice what it should. His boots left wet prints on the tile as he stepped inside, slow and deliberate, each footfall heavy. The rain outside hadn't let up, but somehow he looked as if he'd been submerged, not caught in a storm. His clothes clung to him unnaturally, and droplets fell from his sleeves, splashing softly onto the floor. He didn't look at her. He didn't look at anything. He walked straight to the counter and sat on the stool closest to the register, water pooling beneath him, spreading outward in a dark, uneven halo. Mara stood frozen, cloth still in her hand, watching as the puddle grew. It should have stopped. Water always did. But this didn't. She started, then cleared her throat. "You okay out there? Roads are bad tonight." The man said nothing. Up close, she could see his face better. Pale. Too pale. His eyes were open but unfocused, staring straight ahead at the wall behind the counter. His lips were slightly parted, as if he'd been about to speak and then changed his mind. Water dripped steadily from the tip of his nose, hitting the counter with soft, rhythmic taps. Mara swallowed. "Coffee?" she asked. The man didn't respond. She waited, counting seconds, listening to the rain hammering the roof. After a moment that stretched uncomfortably long, she turned and poured a cup anyway. The coffee steamed as she set it in front of him, the heat sending faint curls of vapor into the air. The man didn't react. He didn't blink. The steam drifted toward his face, brushing his skin, and for just a second, Mara thought she saw it bend unnaturally, as if avoiding him. "You can sit in a booth if you want," she said, trying to sound normal. Counters. Slippery. Still nothing. Her eyes dropped to the floor. The puddle beneath him was wider now, creeping toward her shoes. She stepped back instinctively, the soles of her sneakers sticking slightly as they pulled away from the wet tile. Something about the water bothered her. It was too dark. Not muddy, not oily, just wrong. It reflected the diner lights in a dull, warped way, swallowing the brightness instead of shining it back. "Sir," she said more firmly, "you gotta tell me if you want something." The man lifted his hand. Mara flinched, her heart jumping into her throat. But his movement was slow, almost mechanical. His fingers closed around the coffee cup, and for the first time, she heard a sound from him. A faint clink as ceramic met ceramic. He raised the cup to his lips, paused, then set it back down untouched. That was when the smell hit her. Not rain, not damp clothes, something deeper. Stagnant, like water that had been sitting too long in the dark. Her stomach twisted. "You don't have to pay right now," she said quickly. "You can just warm up, dry off." The man's head turned slightly, just enough for one eye to meet hers. It was gray. Not the natural gray of age, but flat and lifeless, like storm clouds reflected in dirty glass. For a heartbeat, Mara felt as though something was pressing down on her chest, squeezing the air from her lungs. Then he looked away again, back to the wall, and the pressure vanished. The bell rang. Mara spun toward the door, expecting another customer. The diner was still empty. The door was closed. The bell above it swayed gently, as if someone had passed through moments ago. She turned back to the counter. The stool was empty. The man was gone. Only the puddle remained. It spread across the floor, wider than before, seeping into the cracks between tiles. Mara stared at it, her mind struggling to catch up. She rushed around the counter, her shoes splashing through the water, and grabbed a mop from the supply closet. She worked fast, heart racing, pushing the water toward the drain near the back. But no matter how much she mopped, the puddle didn't shrink. The mop head came away soaked, dripping onto the floor, adding to the mess instead of clearing it. The water wasn't going anywhere. By the time the sky began to lighten with the promise of dawn, the puddle was still there, dark and unmoving, as if it had soaked into the diner itself. Mara clocked out an hour later than usual, exhausted and unsettled. When the morning waitress arrived, she noticed the wet floor immediately. "Roof leak?" she asked. Mara shook her head. "Something like that." By the time she came back the next night, the floor was dry. At 12:07 a.m., the bell rang, and the man walked in again. The bell over the diner door rang again the following night, right on schedule, at exactly 2:17 a.m. It was the kind of sound that cut through everything else, the hum of fluorescent lights, the low hiss of the coffee machine, the rain ticking against the windows like impatient fingers. Every regular in the dead man's diner knew that bell. It announced truckers with tired eyes, insomniacs chasing caffeine, cops killing time before sunrise. But this ring was different. It always was. Short. Heavy. As if the door itself hesitated before letting whoever stood outside cross the threshold. Marlene felt it before she heard it. A pressure behind her eyes, a tightening in her chest. She had learned to recognize the moment instinctively, the way prey senses a shadow pass overhead. Her hand paused mid-pour, coffee spilling slightly over the rim of the mug before she caught herself. The puddle spread across the counter, dark and glossy, reflecting the overhead lights. For a fleeting second, she thought she saw movement in that reflection. Ripples where none should be. Then the door opened. The man stood there, framed by rain and darkness, water streaming from his coat in steady lines that struck the linoleum with soft, rhythmic taps. He was tall, shoulders slumped as if carrying an invisible weight, his face pale and indistinct, features blurred by shadow and wet hair plastered to his forehead. He didn't look at anyone as he stepped inside. He never did. He simply walked to the same booth near the back, the vinyl seat creaking faintly under his weight, and sat down. No one spoke. They never did. Not when he came. Conversations died mid-sentence. Forks paused halfway to mouths. Even the jukebox, old and temperamental, seemed to fall silent on its own, the record ending with a soft hiss before the needle lifted. Outside, the rain intensified, drumming harder against the windows, as if the night itself were leaning closer to listen. Marlene wiped her hands on her apron and forced herself to breathe. She had told herself again and again that tonight would be different, that she would say something, ask a question, anything. But as she approached the booth, tray in hand, her resolve faltered. Up close, the man smelled like cold water and rust, like a river after a storm. Water pooled beneath the table, spreading slowly, seeping into the grooves of the floor. Marlene set down a cup of black coffee without being asked. "Here you go," she said softly. The man's eyes lifted then, just enough to meet hers. They were dark, not in color, but in depth, like looking into something that went far back and didn't end where it should. His lips parted slightly, as if he might speak. Marlene leaned in without realizing it, her heart pounding so hard she was sure everyone could hear it. But no sound came. He nodded once, a small, deliberate motion. Then he reached into his coat pocket and placed a few damp bills on the table. They were old, the ink faded, the paper stiff and brittle from repeated soaking and drying. Marlene recognized them immediately. They were always the same. She stepped away before her legs could give out, retreating behind the counter as the man lifted the coffee cup. He never drank it. He only held it, steam curling up around his face, mingling with the water still dripping from his hair. The puddle beneath him continued to spread, reaching farther than it ever had before, creeping toward the aisle, toward the other booths. In the kitchen, Frank watched from the pass-through window, his jaw clenched. He had worked here longer than anyone, long enough to remember when the diner was new, when the name had been a joke instead of a warning. He had seen things in his life, things you didn't talk about, but nothing unsettled him like this. Not because it was loud or violent, but because it was patient. "He's staying longer," Frank muttered. Marlene didn't answer. She was staring at the clock above the grill, its second hand ticking steadily forward. 2:19 a.m., 2:20. The man usually left by now, always before 2:30, always without incident. But tonight, he remained seated, unmoving, the puddle beneath him now reflecting the dim glow of the exit sign like a second, warped doorway. A low sound filled the diner then. At first, Marlene thought it was thunder rolling in from far away, but it didn't fade. It grew louder, deeper, vibrating through the soles of her shoes. The sound of water. Rushing. Pressing. As if something outside were rising, pushing against the walls. One of the truckers stood abruptly, chair scraping loudly against the floor. "I'm done," he said, voice shaking. "I'm not staying for this." He made it 3 steps toward the door before the lights flickered. Just once. But in that instant of darkness, something changed. When the lights came back on, the man in the booth was standing. Water poured from him now, not in drips, but in sheets, cascading onto the floor in a widening pool. His head was tilted slightly, as if listening to something far away. His eyes were fixed on the door, on the night beyond it, on the place he always returned to. And for the first time since anyone could remember, he took a step forward. The diner stopped pretending after that night. No one said it out loud, but something in the air had shifted, like a rule had been broken or a boundary crossed that couldn't be repaired. Earl kept the place open because that's what he had always done, because closing felt like admitting defeat, and because some habits are stronger than fear. But the bell over the door rang differently now. Louder. Sharper. Every time it chimed, Maggie felt it in her teeth. The puddle by booth 3 never dried. They tried everything. Towels, mops, bleach, industrial fans borrowed from a neighboring garage. By morning, the floor would be clean. By nightfall, the water would be back, spreading slowly, seeping into the grout like the diner itself was bleeding. It was always cold to the touch, always smelled faintly of iron and river mud. And if you stood too close for too long, you could swear you heard something beneath it. Not a voice exactly, but movement, like water flowing where it shouldn't. The customers noticed. Truckers stopped sitting near the back. Locals began choosing booths closer to the windows, where the neon glow felt safer somehow. A few people asked questions. Earl lied. Plumbing issue, old pipes. Maggie learned to smile while her hands shook. The man kept coming. Every night. Same time. Same soaked coat. Same empty eyes. But he was changing. At first it was subtle. The water he left behind spread farther. His footsteps lingered longer, echoing faintly even after he sat down. Then Maggie noticed his reflection didn't always match him anymore. In the chrome trim behind the counter, she once saw him standing when he was clearly seated. Another night, his reflection stayed behind after he rose, staring at her long after he'd turned away. He never ate, never spoke, but he listened. One night, as the storm outside reached a low, constant roar, Maggie felt it, the certainty that if she didn't do something, the diner wouldn't survive another week. Maybe she wouldn't either. So when the man sat down, water pooling around his boots, she didn't walk away. She poured the coffee herself, set it in front of him. Her hands were steady, though she didn't know how. "You don't have to keep coming," she said quietly. The diner went impossibly still. Even the rain seemed to pause. The man's head lifted for the first time. His face up close was wrong. Not decayed, not monstrous, just unfinished, like a memory worn thin from being replayed too many times. His eyes focused on her with effort, as if seeing was something he'd forgotten how to do. "I don't know where else to go," he said. His voice sounded like water, moving through a long, narrow pipe. Maggie swallowed. "What happened to you?" The lights flickered. For a moment, the diner wasn't the diner anymore. Maggie saw headlights cutting through rain, a slick curve in the road, a diner sign glowing like a promise, tires losing grip, cold water rushing in, panic, darkness. "He never made it inside," the man said. "But I did." The puddle surged outward, lapping at Maggie's shoes. She didn't move. "You're stuck," she said. He nodded slowly. "And so is this place." That was when Earl intervened. He shouted, grabbed a bat from behind the counter, told the man to leave, to get out, to take his water with him. The bat passed straight through the man's shoulder like smoke through smoke. The diner screamed. Not audibly, but the walls groaned, the windows rattled, the floor buckled beneath the spreading water. The neon sign outside burst in a shower of sparks. The man stood, towering now, water pouring from him in sheets. "He just wanted to sit somewhere warm," Maggie said later, though she never remembered saying it out loud. The next morning, the diner was closed, permanently. They said the foundation had failed. Water damage, structural issues, condemned. Bulldozers came within the week. Earl watched from his truck as the building came down, booth by booth, counter by counter, until nothing remained but wet earth and broken concrete. The puddle was gone. So was the man. Years later, there's a stretch of road where GPS glitches and radios cut out during storms. Truckers say their headlights sometimes catch a shape standing where the diner used to be, rain pouring through him, waiting. Some swear they hear a bell ring when no door is there, and if you pull over, if you sit with your engine off long enough, you might feel it. The sense that something is still open, still waiting, still serving the last customer of the night.
Thank you for watching C&T Horror Stories, where the shadows speak and the night never ends. If you made it this far, you're braver than most. Make sure to like, subscribe, and hit the bell, because there are many more stories waiting in the dark, and they're getting impatient.